queen who mistook fear for love. Chapter 1. In the kingdom of Cosmos, where the fountains were trained to rise in symmetrical arcs, and even the roses grow in pairs, afraid to be alone in case they dropped a leaf, there lived a queen who had never trusted anything that grew. Growth, to her mind, was merely decay with better manners. A child grew into a man, and a man into a problem. A sapling grew into a tree, and a tree into roots beneath the palace walls. Affection grew into dependence, grief grew into poetry, and hope grew into expectation, which was the most dangerous weed of them all. Queen Niobe had 3 children. This was considered stability by the court, expensive by the treasurer, and stress relief by the physicians, it always being nice to have a spare if things went wrong. The eldest was Prince Telios. He was handsome, in the manner of portraits commissioned by power, and not by grandparents. He possessed his mother's piercing eyes, his father's grave mouth, and the solemn posture of someone who had already been told history expected things from him. His shoulders seemed broad enough to take the weight, even if he did, on occasion, not stand as upright as the queen would like. He was clever, not brilliantly clever, for brilliance often turns sideways and set fire to curtains, but properly clever. He learned languages quickly, remembered treaties precisely, and once corrected a map of the kingdom at the age of 12, much to the delight of the royal tax collector, 3 generals, and the considerable dismay of one cartographer, who had been living quite comfortably off the mistake for years. The second child was Princess Trophea, whose beauty arrived early and then appeared somewhat embarrassed by itself, though it carried on regardless. She moved as though music had once explained walking to her privately. Courtiers lowered their voices when she entered rooms, not because she commanded reverence, but because beauty, when sufficiently organized, has always been mistaken for authority. She was kind. Not wildly kind, for wild kindness gives away kingdoms and pardons criminals on days with rainbows, but usefully kind. She remembered servants' names, gave coins to beggars selected by the almoner, and wept for tragedies at the exact distance required by rank. The third child was Prince Trophis. Trophis was considerably younger than the other 2, and happier. This caused difficulties. He was not handsome, though he smiled as if he saw beauty in everything, and not just where he was told it resided. He was not clever, though he asked questions that made clever people uncomfortable. He was not graceful, unless one considered falling downstairs with optimism a new branch of dance. At 5, he tried to hatch a breakfast egg by keeping it warm beneath his shirt. At 6, he declared that shadows were the thoughts of furniture. At 7, he released 3 emergency royal pigeons, causing the entire military to raise its readiness state to raven black. As he later explained, the pigeons in question had looked as if they knew something and were being prevented from saying it. The ambassadors from the neighbouring kingdom had pretended not to be amused, and certainly not delighted. The pigeons, perhaps, had been. Queen Niobe loved all of her children, and this must be clearly understood. She loved Teleos for the king he might become. She loved Trophea for the alliance she might secure. And she loved Trophis in the anxious, pained way one loves a cracked vase inherited from a dead aunt. Sincerely, but with constant awareness of where it ought not to be placed. The king had died when Trophis was 3, carried away by a fever which had entered the palace disguised as weather, and left behind an empty throne, a widow, and 3 futures far too delicate to be trusted to themselves. Since then the queen had ruled carefully. Carefully being the word rulers use when they mean fear has become administrative. She felt no need for the complications a man might bring into her life, nor the restrictions he might imagine himself entitled to place upon it. Her life was already full enough in raising her 3 children, although a dance partner might be nice. No, men, she decided, were best restricted to war and perhaps the pruning of roses, provided they did not get ideas above their station in either of these pursuits. And so time passed, dressed in the trappings of power and family. She interviewed nursemaids, she inspected tutors, she approved menus, she corrected the sentiments of prayers, she quelled rebellions at bedtime and in bloody fields. The children's lessons were arranged with mathematical precision. Their friendships were examined for moral content. Their play was supervised by women who had themselves long ago forgotten how to. Teleos learned governance. Trophea learned diplomacy. Trophis learned mostly that frogs were difficult to keep in pockets. The queen tried not to despair, but parents, being creatures who mistake anxiety for prophecy, often see in their children not what is there, but what might someday ruin everything. In Teleos, she saw hesitation. In Trophea, vanity. In Trophis, chaos wearing shoes. And behind them all she saw the kingdom, fragile, hungry, full of nobles who smiled too much, priests who remembered too much, generals who wanted wars because war made their uniforms relevant, and peasants who expected bread with irregularity bordering on insolence. A kingdom, she had learned, was not a thing one ruled, it was a thing one prevented from becoming itself. Messy, anarchic, lacking orders and manners. Children were worse. Or had she already been thinking about children? Kingdoms at least had borders. Trophis didn't even have boundaries. On the evening of Trophis's 8th birthday, he climbed into the fountain of the great courtyard to rescue the moon. It had, in fairness, been reflecting there, and so was not completely without blame. The court froze, even though the evening was quite mild for October. The queen stood at the top of the marble steps, watching her youngest son splash knee-deep among lilies and silver coins, his velvet sleeves dark with water, his face radiant with purpose. "Do not worry, mother," he called. "It has only fallen in." There was laughter then, not much, only a few servants near the back, and one very old duke who had lost his discretion along with most of his marbles, gambling being the ruin of many a gentleman and cad alike. But the queen heard it, standing alone, aloof, above them all. A small sound, a human sound, a dangerous sound. For power was in the end only a mummer's trick, residing nowhere except for where men agreed to believe in it. And so her heart sank as the queen began to suspect what order might someday demand.
Three children dwell beneath her crown, one wise, one fair, one wild. She guards the kingdom stone by stone, and fear by fear each child. She calls it love to hold them close, to guide each heart and hand. For nothing grows beyond her gaze, and naught beyond command. But fountains laugh and roses climb, and moons fall from above. No walls can keep out growing things, no walls can keep in growing things, not even fearful.